Hi, my name is Claire Bennett, and I'm 33. The night my mother broke me wasn't with a slap, it was with a sentence. At my father's birthday dinner, she raised her glass and looked right at me. Sometimes I wish Claire had never been born. At least Anna gave us something to be proud of. The words hung heavy in the air, louder than any laughter. My sister smirked, my father stayed silent, and the relatives shifted uncomfortably. But no one defended me, not one. I smiled, but it wasn't joy, it was survival. They thought I was weak, invisible, unwanted. What they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment all along, and the truth I carried would turn their silence into shock. Before we continue, if you love these stories, please subscribe to our channel, because that is our motivation to make better stories each day for you. And now let us know where you are listening in the comment. I grew up in the same house as Anna, not the same world. Mom kept her trophies dusted, her praise polished and ready. Mine? I learned to live on crumbs, then thank her for them. Why can't you be more like your sister? Was a soundtrack. Report cards lay between us like proof I wasn't enough. Straight B's meant lectures. Anna's A's bought confetti and cake. At dinner, Mom's questions had targets and I wasn't one. How's mock trial, Anna? How's your internship? Your future looks bright. Then her eyes on me, flat as a shut door. And you, Claire? Still changing your mind? I worked hard, but effort didn't translate to affection. I cleaned the kitchen till it gleamed. She fixed on a streak. I won a small art prize. She called it a hobby. Pretty drawings don't pay rent, she said, passing the peas. On my 15th birthday, the house smelled like lemon cleaner. A paper crown from the grocery store. A store-bought cupcake. Mom forgot the candles. Dad forgot to show up. Anna posted a selfie. I washed the dishes. Comparison cut deeper than insults, because it sounded reasonable. Anna was the gold standard. I was the cautionary tale. Every success of hers became another proof against me. Every stumble of mine became family entertainment. I learned the tricks of the invisible child early. Walk softly. Keep answers short. Swallow heat before it shows. Make yourself small enough to fit inside their silence. But silence trains you to doubt even your pulse. Some nights I lay awake counting ceiling cracks, not dreams. I told myself distance would fix it once I left. As if miles could unteach a mother's voice. Senior year guidance night. A gym full of folding chairs. Mom beamed at Anna's scholarship meeting, never sat in mine. On the drive home, she said it like a verdict. Some people are meant for more. You just find something steady. So I did what forgotten daughters do best. Adapt. I took whatever jobs kept the lights on, no applause. Hostess. Retail. Night shifts that made the sun feel foreign. I paid my way without asking them for anything. The day I started deliveries, Mom didn't hide her smirk. Running food? At least it's honest work, she told the neighbors. Honest wasn't what stung, only a delivery girl. Only the sister who didn't become a headline. But loneliness can be an engine if you feed it right. Out there in the rain, I learned to read doors. Most slammed. One didn't. A name, a floor number, a note that sounded different. Unit 2304, Lakeview Tower. Please leave by the door. I didn't know it yet, but that door wasn't delivery. It was an opening. The rain smelled like pennies and steam. I drove anyway. One name kept pinging. Unit 2304, Lakeview Tower. Same order. Polite notes. Please leave by the door. Don't ring. Thank you, W. The elevator stuck on 21. When it opened, an older man waited. Silver hair, careful eyes. You came fast, he said. Most people bail in rain. Every night that ends in Y, I said. He laughed and handed me a card. Call if you want steadier work, fewer stairs. Whitaker and Row. Lakeshore Drive. Quiet money. It started with pharmacy runs and drop-offs. Then calendar blocks, gate logs, vendor bids I barely understood. He watched how I labeled files, how I confirmed details twice. You're meticulous, he said. That's rarer than you think. I signed an NDA. Pay hit different, clean on time, insured. In meetings, I sat in back and took notes. Errands became systems. Systems became trust. Spreadsheets scare people, he said. Don't let them. I didn't. Numbers started talking. I built due diligence lists. He began asking, what am I missing? And waited for my take. At home, I still pulled the occasional delivery shift. Not for money, for cover. Let them see what they wanted. I needed peace to build. Sundays, I measured my new life carefully. Bills. Dreams. A fund I wouldn't touch. I sent nothing home. Silence doesn't earn me. It costs me. I was done paying. Then came the first wire. 7 zeros blinked back like teeth. Confirm every digit twice, he said. Then trust yourself. I did. The confirmation ping felt like a new heartbeat. Paychecks climbed, but that wasn't what healed. What healed was being seen, trained, and trusted. He introduced me as Claire, my right hand. One afternoon, I'm stepping back, oversee the lake project. A portfolio, a team, decisions that would carry my name. People will underestimate you. Use it, free cover. I left with a binder heavy as a future. In the elevator mirror, I met a version of myself my mother never made room for, but I had. Then Mom called about Dad's birthday dinner. Family only, she said. Anna's bringing champagne. I checked my calendar and smiled, sure and quiet. The timing was perfect. My double life had outgrown the shadows. The proof wouldn't be words. It would be something they could hold. I should have known the wire wasn't the loudest click. The key I was about to place on that table was... Dad's birthday was a Saturday. Steak smoke, yard lights, clinking ice. Cousins filled the kitchen. Anna floated like a parade queen. Mom stacked plates and pride, both polished bright. I arrived on time, quiet, a small gift bag in hand. Claire made it, Mom said like a drizzle warning. Anna kissed Dad, slid a ribboned envelope to his plate. From my bonus, she announced. Laughter followed. My chair scraped softer than their approval. Outside, a covered transporter eased to the curb. Dessert talk drowned the idling engine. A text from the driver, "We're here." My pulse steadied. When the plates cleared, I stood. "I have a gift for you, Dad," I said. Mom's mouth tilted. "Pizza coupons again?" Chuckles rolled. I let them pass. From the bag, I lifted one thing. A key fob, black and chrome, flashing under the chandelier. The room went still. "For you," I said, setting it by his fork. "What is this?" Dad asked. "Step outside," I said. "All of you." On the curb, the tarp peeled back. Silver paint under the porch light. Blue leather within. A new sedan. Clean title. Insurance ready. Someone whistled. Someone swallowed. Anna's smile twitched. Mom's face hardened. I handed Dad a folder. Registration and delivery checklist. "For rides to school," I said. "For the roof. For the winter oil changes." He touched the fob like it might vanish. "You can't afford this," Mom said, words frosted. "I can." The driver pointed at the signature line. Dad signed, hand shaky, eyes wet. "Where did the money come from?" Anna asked. "The truth," I said, pulling a second envelope. Business cards slid along the porch rail. Claire Bennett. Operations Whitaker and Rowe. Silence checked every face. "You work for Whitaker?" A neighbor breathed. "Work with," I said. "Lake project. Operations lead." Mom recovered first. "So you deliver contracts now?" "They call it a promotion," I said. First wire cleared last quarter. Dad stared at the car like a sunrise he hadn't planned. "You did this," he said. "Yes," I said, "I did." Applause arrived slow, then gathered like rain. Not from everyone. Mom's jaw set. Anna's eyes went thin and bright. Inside, dessert waited, but the room had changed. The joke met a mirror and died. "I brought proof you can hold, drive, and title." Back at the table, Dad palmed the fob. "Thank you," he whispered. I nodded once. Then Mom set down her fork with a small, surgical click. "Tell us," she said, sweet as a blade. "What's your real job, Claire?" The room leaned forward. I breathed in and put the truth on the table. She wasn't ready for the answer. I was ready for what would follow. This wasn't a reveal. It was a reckoning, with witnesses. "Your real job," Mom repeated, smiling like a sharpened spoon. "Because handing out keychains isn't a career, dear." I kept my voice flat. "Operations lead, Whitaker and Rowe, Lake project. Vendor contracts, timelines, compliance, wires I authorize after I verify twice." A cousin snorted. "Sounds made up." Anna leaned in, sugar turned steel. "Who vouched for you? Pity hire?" "Results vouched," I said. "And so did Mr. Whitaker." I set a thin folder down, meeting agendas, project milestones, my initials. No numbers, no NDA breaches, enough shape to be undeniable. Mom glanced, then waved it off like smoke. Anyone can print paper. Claire has always been imaginative. The table chuckled the way people do when cruelty feels safe. I let the laughter finish. "Here's what's not imagination," I said, ticking off fingers. Night shifts that paid rent. Errands that became systems. The first wire I cleared. The team I lead now. Dad's thumb worked the fob like a worry stone. "She's telling the truth," he said, almost to himself. "Feels true." Mom's gaze snapped. "Thomas." He looked down. "Just saying." Anna exhaled through her nose. "Okay, let's pretend it's real. You still dodged responsibility while I actually built a career." I met her eyes. "I built mine where you didn't look. I kept quiet so the work could grow roots." Mom leaned back, victory pose rehearsed. "Then prove it. Salary, title, put it on speaker." "I don't owe you numbers," I said, calm holding. I owe you boundaries. Here they are. You don't speak to me like I'm a punchline. You don't compare me to Anna like I'm a defective model. You don't rewrite my life at this table. Her smile thinned. Ungrateful. There it was. The family password for obedience. I nodded once, as if we'd reached the thesis. I'm grateful for what was real. Rides to school. A roof. Work ethic even when it cut. But I won't earn love by standing still for you to aim at. Aunt Marion cleared her throat. Maybe we could... Mom sliced the air. Stay out of this. I set my napkin down like a resignation letter. Here's what happens next, I said steady. I'll come to things where respect is the dress code. If I'm mocked, I leave. If I'm lied about, I correct it. If I'm baited, I don't bite. I go. Anna scoffed. So dramatic. Dramatic is a bow on contempt, I said, glancing at the car. This is documentation. Dad's voice found a careful lane. Thank you, kiddo. 2 words. Small. True. Enough to stand on. Mom folded her arms, crown made of cold air. You think buying toys buys dignity. Dignity isn't for sale, I said. It's enforced. I'm enforcing mine. Silence expanded, then hit the walls and fell back. No one moved a fork. Somewhere, the ice machine rattled its small weather. I pushed my chair in. Dessert looks great. If you want me here, keep it civil. I held Mom's eyes until the message landed. She looked away first. For the first time, leaving wasn't a retreat. It was a rule written in my own handwriting. I should have known the quiet after a reckoning is just the eye of storm. I didn't slam doors. I took my coat and left. The night was cold and clean. So was my chest. In the quiet car, my hands stopped shaking. Winning the room wasn't the point. Keeping myself was. Monday, the lake project snapped tight. Vendor calls. Site walk. A risk log that won't lie. Work didn't ask who my sister was. Mr. Whitaker looked over his glasses. You good? He asked, like checking a deadline. Better than good, I said. And meant it. That night I wrote rules and taped them in a cabinet. Show up where respect is required. Correct lies once, exit fast. Stop earning love by standing still for aim. At dawn, Dad texted the car in sunrise. Run smooth, he wrote. Proud of you. 2 sentences. Small, true. Mom called twice. I let it ring out. I replied with 1 line that could hold. I'll come by when we can speak without comparisons. I started saying yes to different tables. Coffee with the team. A Friday dinner without apology. A stubborn plant that wouldn't die on my sill. Lives grow where they're watered, not watched. A month later, an envelope waited at my door. Mom's handwriting, softer than before. Inside, no excuses, just 1 line bending the air. I raised you wrong. If you have room, I'm here. I didn't forgive history in a paragraph. I didn't sprint back to the table that cut me. I left the door on the latch, not the chain. Compassion without entry. For now, enough. Here's what held once their laughter lost power. Dignity isn't for sale, it's enforced. Silence isn't peace, it's a tax. Family is a verb, or it's theater. If someone names you a disappointment, write your own definition. If a room can't hold your quiet, take it with you. Grow roots where you're seen, not measured. Let proof arrive without a speech. Have you lived a night like mine? Tell me below. If this found you at the right moment, you're not alone. Tap hype this week so someone else hears it. And remember, you don't have to stay to be worthy.
The clink of silverware against porcelain filled the air, a polished soundtrack to the French Quarter brunch my aunt had insisted on. Linen-draped tables crowded the room, waiters weaving between them with trays of champagne glasses and plates stacked with seasonal eggs. Benedict, my mother, Marjorie, raised her mimosa with deliberate slowness, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. You're lucky we even include you, she said, her voice light, almost playful, though her eyes never softened. My Aunt Lucille gave a thin laugh, swirling her drink before adding, let her feel important for a change. Across the table, my brother Dorian threw his head back with exaggerated amusement, his laugh echoing loud enough to draw glances from the next table. I kept my hand steady around the coffee cup, lifting it as though its weight alone tethered me to the moment. I smiled faintly, just enough to appear agreeable, and said nothing. Over the years, I had perfected silence as armor. To react was to be accused of being too sensitive. To speak up was to be told I was ruining the mood. The game was always the same sharp words from my mother, mockery from Dorian, Lucille watching like an audience member enjoying the show, and me, the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who existed in their eyes only when bills needed paying, Tickets needed booking, or accounts needed fixing. I could almost hear the unspoken script, "Rachel will handle it. Rachel has it covered." Only my name wasn't Rachel. It was Callista. And yet even that identity felt borrowed, erased under the weight of their convenience. I sipped the lukewarm coffee, keeping my expression neutral, but something inside me shifted. Their laughter no longer stung, it calcified, and I knew this brunch would mark the beginning of something they would never see coming. The brunch ended as they always did, with my card left on the tray and no one offering to split the bill. I walked back through the quarter, past wrought iron balconies and street musicians, my mind drifting through the long catalog of times I had been expected to carry everyone else. It started small, back when I was 24 and just beginning my career. My mother called, flustered about booking a plane ticket to Baton Rouge for a reunion. "The internet confuses me," she had sighed. I had typed in her information, purchased the ticket with my own card, and promised myself she'd reimburse me. She never did. The next year, it became 2 tickets. By the third, she didn't even pretend anymore. Lucille was subtler, presenting her requests like favors I should feel honored to provide. "You're closer to the hotel websites, dear," she'd say. Asking me to reserve rooms for her trips to Houston, she promised to pay me back at check-in, but somehow the charges always lingered on my statements. I told myself it was easier not to argue. Then there was Dorian. His requests were louder, wrapped in urgency. One spring, he called asking to use my credit card for an anniversary trip. "I'll pay you back as soon as my bonus comes in," he insisted. The bonus never arrived. The balance stayed. He repeated the pattern enough times that I stopped expecting repayment. I became, in his words, the reliable one. Ironically, my job as a forensic accountant demanded precision, the ability to untangle other people's financial messes with patience and logic. I could trace fraud buried under layers of invoices, reconstruct hidden transactions from scraps of data. Yet when it came to my own family, I let chaos spill unchecked into my life, convincing myself that carrying their burdens would make me indispensable. But that brunch shifted something. For the first time, I began to see reliability not as a strength, but as the chain that kept me bound. And the weight of it was no longer something I wanted to bear as I thought of the lake house that symbolized everything unspoken between us. Whenever my family spoke of the cabin, they called it our house, as though the word itself wrapped us in some shared legacy. In truth, there was nothing collective about it. The deed bore one name, mine, and it had since the summer of 2009, the year my father nearly lost it to foreclosure. His credit was wrecked from years of unpaid loans, and no one else in the family qualified to step in. I was 21, fresh out of school, with the only clean record. I signed the papers to keep the cabin standing. My father shook my hand and muttered a distracted good, as though I'd simply taken out the trash. Since then, every expense, property taxes, storm repairs, winter heating, even the insurance premiums had flowed out of my account like a second rent. I tracked the invoices in neat folders, each one stamped with my name as guarantor. Not once did anyone offer to contribute. When the bills came, they turned silent. But when summer arrived, they descended on Caddo Lake like it was a public resort. I remember walking in after one of their weekend's beer bottles scattered on the deck. The refrigerator emptied, the air conditioning humming at full blast, even though no one was there. Once, Dorian gave the keys to friends without telling me, leaving strangers to sprawl across the living room I had just paid to furnish. When I objected, he brushed it off. "It's family property, Callista. Don't be so uptight." And yet, for years, I swallowed it. I convinced myself that maintaining the cabin was proof of my place in the family, that if I kept shouldering the responsibility, they would one day see me differently. But all I ever became was the quiet caretaker of something they felt entitled to claim. As I thought back on it, the brunch words still stung. "Lucky we include you." I began to realize the cabin wasn't a tie binding us together. It was the clearest evidence of how invisible I had always been, And that truth was already hardening into resolve as the memory of their laughter replayed in my mind. When I returned to the table after a trip to the restroom, the air was already humming with laughter. Dorian looked me up and down with a grin that was anything but kind. "God, Callista," he said, loud enough for the server clearing plates to hear. "You look like you crawled out of a church donation bin. Didn't realize beige was back in style." The table erupted. My aunt coughed into her napkin as if she were stifling laughter. My mother didn't even lift her eyes from her mimosa, though the curl of her mouth betrayed her amusement. It was all too familiar one line from Dorian, a chorus of silence from the rest, and me, the easy target who never fought back. In the past, I would have felt heat rising in my face, a pressure in my throat as I fought not to let them see me cry. I would have replayed the words for days, trying to convince myself they hadn't meant them the way they sounded. But this time was different. The sting never came. What settled instead was something colder, quieter, a clarity so sharp it sliced through every old excuse I had made for them. I lifted my coffee and took a measured sip, keeping my eyes on the window beyond them, where sunlight spilled across the cobblestone street. Let them laugh. Let them believe they'd landed another blow. They didn't know that I had stopped playing the role they'd written for me. In that moment, I understood the truth with a finality I had never let myself admit before. I wasn't part of this family, not in the way they pretended. I was a convenience, a bank account, a body to fill the empty seat. Nothing more. I set my cup down, steady, unflinching, and offered a faint smile as though I hadn't heard a word. Inside, though, the decision was already forming. I would no longer be the nameless chair at their table. That night, I would begin undoing the ties they assumed I'd hold forever. By the time I made it back to Houston that evening, the sun had already sunk behind the skyline. I drove in silence. No music, no radio chatter, just the low hum of the tires against asphalt. My apartment was as orderly as always, everything in its place. Yet the moment I stepped inside, it felt different, emptier, like a waiting room for a decision I had already made. I set my bag down, filled the kettle, and brewed a cup of peppermint tea. The steam curled in the air as I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop in front of me. My fingers hovered above the keyboard for a moment, then moved with certainty. The subject line of the email read, "Ready now." I addressed it to Jared Whitman, the attorney who had helped me back in 2009 when the lake house nearly slipped into foreclosure. We had talked before about selling it, but I had always backed out at the last minute, telling myself it wasn't the right time. That hesitation was gone. I typed a short, direct message, attached the scanned deed and expense records, and hit send. The moment the screen flashed a message sent, I felt something in my chest loosen. Next came the shared credit account, the one I had created years ago to make things simpler for the family. I logged in and scrolled through the list of authorized users. Marjorie, Dorian, Lucille. Each name was a reminder of years of silence when the bills came due and years of assumption that I would always cover them. The system asked with each removal, "Are you sure you want to revoke access?" Yes. Again. Yes. One more time. Yes. I deleted every automatic payment, closed every loophole, and with a final click, the account went dark. No more overdrafts disguised as oversights. No more cards maxed out in my name. I sipped the last of my tea, the taste faintly bitter, and closed the laptop. Midnight had slipped past, the city outside still buzzing with life. But inside, the quiet was absolute. For the first time in years, I felt the beginning of freedom, though I knew the silence wouldn't last once they discovered what I had done. It didn't take long. 3 days after I shut everything down, the first text arrived from Dorian. "Why isn't my card working?" 10 minutes later, I'm in Vegas. "Don't tell me you shut it down." The calls came in waves after that, ringing until my phone buzzed warm in my hand. I turned it face down on the table and let the screen go dark. By the afternoon, My mother chimed in with her usual blend of entitlement and panic. The power at my place got shut off. Something must be wrong with the payment system. Can you take a look for me? A string of messages followed, each more frantic than the last. I didn't answer. For years, I had been their fix-it person, the one they called when the lights went out. The flights needed booking, or a bill had slipped past its due date. But this time, the silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. By the weekend, Lucille sent a photo of the cabin porch, weeds growing wild, grass knee-high, the porch light dark. What's going on? Callista, she wrote. My father, silent for years on financial matters, suddenly appeared in the group chat, asking why the insurance had lapsed and why the cabin had been flagged as high risk. I read every word, every accusation, every thinly veiled guilt trip. Then I muted the thread and set my phone aside. There was nothing left to say. They weren't shocked because they missed me. They were shocked because their safety net had vanished. The quiet inside my apartment deepened. Not peaceful exactly, but firm. For the first time. My silence wasn't avoidance, it was a choice. Each unanswered call, each ignored message, became its own reply, louder than any defense I could have offered. 2 weeks after the first message, their outrage blurred into background noise. A dull hum I no longer felt compelled to acknowledge. And as the weight of their dependence slid off my shoulders, I began to picture the next step returning to the cabin not as its caretaker, but to close the door on it for good. The drive to Caddo Lake was one I could trace in my sleep. Every bend in the road, every stretch of pine and cypress felt etched into my memory. But this time, there was no anticipation of a family gathering waiting on the other end. I was going alone, and for the first time, it felt right. The cabin stood the same as it always had: wooden porch, peeling paint, a swing that creaked in the breeze, yet the silence around it was heavier, almost expectant. I stepped inside, flicking the switch out of habit. The bulb above the kitchen table flickered once before humming to life, though I knew soon even that would go dark. I walked slowly through each room, fingertips brushing the edges of tables I had refinished, walls I had painted, fixtures I had replaced when no one else lifted a hand. On the far wall, the gallery of family photographs remained my parents in younger days. Dorian and me as children, group shots taken on long-forgotten summers. I stood there for a long moment before reaching up and lifting them down one by one. Not rushed, not angry, just deliberate. I placed each frame into a wooden box I had brought with me, sealing the lid and writing across it in black marker family, what it used to be, not to erase the past, but to put it away where it could no longer weigh me down. That afternoon, I sat at the old desk near the window, where sunlight filtered through moss-draped trees, and opened my laptop. I pulled up Jared's email and typed 2 words. Go ahead. Attached were every document he needed to put the house on the market. When I pressed send, the air in the cabin felt different, as if the place itself understood its time had ended. I stood, gathered the box under my arm, and walked out without looking back, already knowing the next knock on my door would not be from silence, but confrontation. 2 evenings after my visit to the lake, there was a knock at my apartment door. At first, I thought it might be a neighbor, but the second knock was sharper, impatient. I peered through the peephole and saw Dorian, his hoodie pulled up, hair unkempt, a paper bag clutched in his hand. He looked nothing like the polished man he paraded online. I opened the door just wide enough to face him. You didn't have to do this, he started, voice low but charged. You've torn the whole family apart. Do you have any idea how selfish this looks? I didn't move from the threshold? Siblings don't treat each other like ATMs, I said, my tone steady. And families don't call someone selfish the moment she says no. His eyes flickered, searching for the sister who would fold, who would apologize to keep the peace. She wasn't there. After a few seconds of silence, I pushed the door closed. His footsteps faded down the hall, leaving only the quiet hum of the building behind. Days passed without contact, until another knock sounded on a Saturday morning. When I opened the door, it was Adrienne, Dorian's girlfriend. Her eyes were red, her voice uneven. She stepped inside and held out a folder bound with a rubber band. "I found these in his desk drawer," she said. "The deed, the tax receipts, the insurance, all in your name. He told me it was his, that he paid for everything." I believed him. I flipped through the pages and saw the proof of what I had always known. She swallowed hard. I left him. "I can't stay with someone who builds lies this deep. I just wanted you to know the truth was never hidden. It was buried." She stood to leave, pausing at the door. "You're not invisible, Callista. Don't ever let him convince you otherwise." When the door shut behind her, the silence that lingered wasn't heavy this time. It was confirmation. And with it, I knew the last tie to the house and to them was already breaking. The sale closed more quickly than I expected. Jared sent the confirmation email on a Tuesday morning, a single line stating the funds had cleared and the deed was officially transferred. I read it twice, then leaned back in my chair, letting the reality settle. The cabin was no longer mine to carry. That afternoon, I opened my banking app and transferred $20,000 into my parents' joint account. It wasn't necessary the documents proved every payment had been mine alone, but I wanted the record to be clean. I wanted no one to say I owed them anything. The money wasn't a gift. It was a seal. Proof that every tie between us had been balanced and closed. Within weeks, I left Houston behind. I bought a small house tucked in the hills north of Austin, just outside of Marble Falls. The property wasn't large, but it had wide windows that welcomed sunlight, a quiet porch that looked out on oaks and limestone ridges, and enough space for me to breathe without feeling watched. Unpacking was slow, deliberate. Each box I opened, each item I placed on a shelf felt like claiming a life I hadn't been allowed to live. There were no group chat messages buzzing, no phone calls asking for login information, no sudden emergencies dropped in my lap. Only stillness and the sound of my own rhythm filling the rooms. At night, I sat on the back porch and listened to the cicadas rise in chorus, their steady hum carrying through the trees. I felt no guilt, no shame, only a strange lightness that came from knowing I had cut the last thread. And yet, as the silence deepened, I began to wonder what would remain when all the noise was gone. The months passed quietly, each one slipping by with a gentleness I had never known before. The family group chat, once constant with demands and guilt-laced reminders, had gone still. No questions about bills, no requests for passwords, no perfunctory holiday invitations. Just silence. The only one who crossed that silence was Ezra, my cousin. 16, lanky, still growing into himself, but steady in ways the adults in our family never managed to be. He'd ride his bike out to my house on weekends, sometimes with a bag of burgers, sometimes with nothing but his company. We didn't need to talk much. His presence was its own reassurance that not everyone in my bloodline had learned to take. One afternoon, I found a postcard slipped under my front door. The picture showed a lake at sunset, purple and orange light spreading across still water that looked too much like Caddo. On the back, written in careful handwriting, were 8 words. "We should have done better. You deserved better. No signature. No clue." I stood by the window for a long time, turning it over in my hands. It didn't matter who had written it, my mother, my brother, or maybe someone who had simply watched from the sidelines. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was an acknowledgement, however small, that the truth had been seen. I didn't place the card on the mantel or pin it to the wall. Instead, I tucked it into a drawer with other keepsakes, reminders of lives I had outgrown. I didn't need it to move forward. My freedom had already arrived, not loud or dramatic, But in the steady quiet of days, I could finally claim as mine. And in that silence, I chose myself. The first thing I noticed was the table. My mother never set the china unless it was Thanksgiving or Christmas, but tonight the plates gleamed under the chandelier like a warning. Crystal flutes lined up at every seat, and a bottle of champagne rested in an ice bucket beside my father's chair. For a Sunday dinner. It felt staged, rehearsed, like I'd walked into someone else's play without a script. I sat down, smoothing the napkin across my lap, pretending not to notice the arrangement. Dorian, of course, had been placed at the head of the table. My parents flanked him on either side, smiling as if this was the natural order of things. I took my usual spot, halfway down, where no one's attention lingered for long. Dinner began with small talk that felt thin, stretched too tight to cover something larger. My mother asked about work. I gave polite answers. My father poured the champagne, though none of us had lifted a toast yet. The bubbles rose, catching the light, distracting me until Dorian cleared his throat. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, the picture of ease. "Next week I'll be moving into Alara's place." His words landed casually, like announcing a new gym membership. Mom and Dad said it'd be good for both of us. She won't be so lonely in that big house, and I can save on rent while I get things sorted. I tightened my grip on the water glass, knuckles whitening as if pressure alone could keep me steady. The words stung, not because they surprised me, but because of how unsurprised I was. I had seen the boxes in the garage labeled with Dorian's things. I had overheard my mother whispering on the phone about how perfect the timing was. Still, hearing it declared in front of me, as if my consent had already been signed away, made my chest burn. My parents beamed, raising their glasses in celebration. My father's voice carried over the clinking crystal. To new beginnings. Around the table. Everyone lifted their champagne. Everyone except me. I set down my water carefully, my other hand brushing against the edge of the purse at my feet, where an envelope waited for its moment. The smile on Dorian's face widened, but I already knew the celebration was premature, because I had come prepared. I let the silence linger for a beat too long, the weight of their toast pressing against me like a dare. Then I reached down, sliding the manila envelope from my purse and placing it in the center of the table. The shift in the room was instant glasses paused midair, my mother's smile freezing at the corners, my father's brow furrowing. "I have news, too," I said, keeping my tone even. My hand rested on the envelope as if anchoring me to the table. "I sold my house last Friday. The couple closes in 30 days. For a moment. There was nothing but the sound of champagne fizzing against glass. Then Dorian's flute slipped from his hand, shattering on the hardwood floor, bubbles spreading like a stain. He didn't move to clean it up. "You what?" His voice cracked, disbelief tangled with outrage. My father pushed back his chair sharply, the legs scraping across the floor. "Ilara, don't be ridiculous. You can cancel a sale. There's always a cooling-off period." He waved a dismissive hand, as if paperwork and contracts could be erased with a gesture. My mother's lips tightened. "We already promised Dorian he'd have a place to stay. You can't possibly expect him to find something in 30 days. I kept my fingers steady on the envelope. "It's done." The word hung heavy. Final. Across the table, Aunt Rosalie tilted her head, eyes narrowing just slightly. But she didn't speak. She only watched, as if waiting to see how far this play would go. My parents exchanged quick glances, their united front cracking just enough to show the panic underneath. Dorian's face flushed red, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't decide whether to argue or shout. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the shift settle over us. The game had changed, and, for once, I wasn't the piece they could move. The call started the next morning. Aunt Lila's number flashed on my screen before I'd even poured my first cup of coffee. Her voice was heavy with disappointment. each word sharpened to cut. "I can't believe you'd sell your house just to spite your brother. He told us everything. You're leaving him homeless." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. But the silence didn't last. Uncle Dennis, then Cousin Mallory, then even my father's golf buddy, each one repeating the same script, the same accusation. By noon, it was clear the story had spread farther than I could control. When I checked Facebook, Dorian's post glared at me from the top of my feed. "Hardest lesson in life is realizing family isn't always there when you need them most. Grateful for those who truly care. Everyone else. God sees your heart." Dozens of comments followed sympathy, outrage, support for him. My mother's reply sat beneath them, shining like a seal of approval. "We love you, son. We're always here for you." I slammed the laptop shut, pulse racing. At work the next day, I caught the shift in the air. Victor Lane, my colleague, leaned against my cubicle wall, his expression tight. "I don't mean to pry. Ilara, but people are talking. Your brother came into the cafe downstairs and told the barista you kicked him out. Word got around fast. Heat rose to my face, but I forced a steady breath. He was never living with me to begin with," I said, but the words felt flimsy against the narrative already moving through the halls. By the end of the week, I stopped answering calls. Every voicemail blurred together lectures dressed as concern, disappointment wrapped as advice. The noise grew louder, while my own truth felt smaller each time I tried to speak it. In the quiet of my kitchen, I stood surrounded by half-packed boxes, the evidence of my reality pressed against the walls, while the world outside decided its own version of my story. The accusations swirled louder with every passing day, but none of them knew the truth I carried alone. The sale of my house wasn't born from spite, it was survival. Last spring, a storm peeled back shingles like paper, exposing 3 separate leaks. The contractor's invoice had read $11,000, a number that nearly knocked the breath out of me. I emptied my vacation fund, took a small loan, and told myself it was a one-time emergency. But emergencies multiplied. A month later, the water line burst, flooding the yard and seeping into the basement. The city handed me the bill, $8,200. I remember standing in the kitchen that night, eating ramen straight from the pot, staring at the damp streak climbing up the wall while trying not to cry. By June, the heating system gave out. $5,000 more. I maxed my credit card for the deposit and begged for a payment plan. Each night, I sat at the table surrounded by bills and statements, scribbling numbers in columns, recalculating until the digits blurred into nonsense. Neighbors waved at me in the mornings, probably seeing a woman who had it all together. They didn't see the dark circles I failed to conceal, the way I punched new holes into my belt instead of buying smaller clothes when stress whittled me down. I became skilled at disguising exhaustion, at smiling when I felt hollow. One evening, while sorting boxes, I found the framed photo from the day I bought the house. There I was on the porch, keys in hand, grinning so wide it looked like joy might split me in half. I traced the edge of the frame with my finger, remembering the feeling of triumph, of pride that no one could take away. I wrapped the photo carefully and set it in the keep box, the reminder of who I once was and the proof of what I'd built. When the doorbell rang a few days later, I was still holding the tape dispenser, sealing another box shut. The knock at the door was sharp, insistent, the kind that didn't wait for permission. I already knew before I opened it who would be standing there. My parents flanked Dorian like an honor guard, his expression sour but triumphant, as though he'd dragged them here to set me straight. "Eden, we need to talk," my mother said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. My father followed, already scanning the half-packed boxes with a look of disdain. Dorian brought up the rear, his arms crossed, his eyes darting over the stacks of sealed containers like a thief measuring what he'd lost. "You can't really be serious about selling," my father said, his voice carrying the weight of authority he'd used on me since childhood. This is just a fit. You'll regret it once you've calmed down. I didn't stop taping the box in front of me. The sound of the dispenser cutting across cardboard was louder than his lecture, and for once, I let it drown him out. Elara. My mother's voice shifted into her coaxing tone, the one meant for fragile patients or unruly children. Your brother needs stability. He's going through a hard time, and you've always had more than enough space. I folded the flaps neatly, pressing the tape down with the flat of my palm. Did anyone ever ask what I need? The words startled even me, hanging in the kitchen like something foreign. My father frowned, as though he hadn't heard correctly. Dorian scoffed, muttering under his breath. I need stability, I repeated, more firmly. I need to sleep at night without worrying if another bill will swallow me whole. I need to stop bleeding my savings dry on a house I can't afford to maintain. And I need to stop being treated like my life is just an extension of his. My mother blinked, lips parting as if to argue. But nothing came. My father cleared his throat. Staring at the ceiling, even Dorian shifted uncomfortably, though his silence didn't last. This isn't fair, he said finally. I sealed another box and placed it with the others. For the first time, I didn't look up to gauge their reactions. The sound of cardboard stacking neatly against cardboard was answer enough as I prepared for what I knew would come next. They called it a family discussion, but the setup made it clear what I was walking into. Chairs were arranged in a circle in my parents' living room, as though an intervention were about to begin. My father sat stiff-backed, my mother at his side, while a cluster of aunts and uncles filled the remaining seats. Dorian lounged with false ease, the picture of a wronged son. But I hadn't come alone. Margot, my financial advisor, sat beside me with a neat folder on her lap. Victor, my colleague, leaned against the wall with crossed arms, his expression cool. And Dorothy, my mother's old friend who had quietly offered support for weeks, gave me the kind of nod that steadied my nerves. My mother began the script. Elara, we're concerned. Selling your house like this, it's impulsive, and it punishes your brother. He has nowhere to go. I opened my own folder and laid the documents on the coffee table. One by one, roof replacement, $11,000. Waterline repair, $8,200. Heating system failure, $5,000. These aren't whims. They're the reality of owning a house alone. The room quieted as I placed the bank statements on top. Balances dwindling with each page. Aunt Rosalie, who usually played silent observer, leaned forward. Her sharp eyes moved from the bills to Dorian. I've watched this family bail you out of rent, cars, credit cards. When does it end? Why is Elara always expected to shoulder more while you drift? Color crept into Dorian's neck. I'm between jobs, he snapped. For how long? Rosalie's tone was unforgiving. At some point, responsibility has to land where it belongs. My father shifted uncomfortably. My mother pursed her lips, but no one rushed to defend him. Dorian's chair scraped against the hardwood as he stood, his face dark with anger. I don't have to sit here and be attacked. The slam of the door punctuated his exit. Silence hung heavy. My parents exchanged looks, the confidence they carried into the evening replaced with unease. For the first time, I wasn't the one shrinking under the weight of judgment. I gathered the remaining papers back into my folder, already bracing for their next attempt. They came back 2 nights later, this time with smiles rehearsed to look conciliatory. My mother carried a pie as if dessert might soften the blow. My father spoke in the falsely cheerful tone he reserved for tense negotiations, and Dorian trailed behind, his expression carefully schooled into gratitude. We've been talking, my mother began as they settled on my couch. We think we've found a solution, instead of moving in with you. Why not help Dorian get his own place, just a loan to cover a deposit and a few months' rent? With your success, it wouldn't even set you back. My father nodded, eager to press the point, a small gesture to keep peace in the family. It's only fair. I let them speak, then reached for the folder I had prepared. I can't give him money. I said evenly, sliding a single sheet across the table. But I can offer him something better. Dorian picked up the business card I placed beside it, frowning. What's this an opening at my company? Entry level. But enough to cover rent on a one-bedroom. I already spoke to HR. They'll interview you if you're interested. Before he could respond, my father's eyes caught the spreadsheet under his hand. Line by line, it listed every financial bailout Dorian had received in the past 5 years' rent payments, car repairs, credit card balances. At the bottom, a total circled in red more than $30,000. My mother gasped, covering her mouth. My father stared at the figure, his face darkening, not with anger at me, but at the undeniable proof in front of him. This isn't punishment, I said quietly. It's reality. Love isn't endless rescue. It's teaching someone to stand. The pie sat untouched on the table as silence spread through the room. For the first time, their certainty faltered, and I saw them as unsure as I had always been. 3 weeks later, the movers carried the last of my boxes into the loft. The space was smaller than the house, but the sunlight that poured through the tall windows made it feel expansive in ways walls never could. The silence was different here too, no longer hollow, but open. My new mortgage was nearly a third less than what I had been paying, and for the first time in years, my budget showed more green than red. I spent the first night surrounded by unpacked boxes, eating takeout on the floor and feeling lighter than I could remember. No creaking pipes threatening to burst, no roof groaning under another storm. Just clean walls and a future I chose. Margot stopped by a few days later with a bottle of wine. She wandered through the loft, nodding at the half-furnished rooms. "You know this isn't running away," she said, handing me a glass. "It's choosing wisely. You cut the weight before it sank you. That's not weakness, it's strategy." Her words sank deep, soothing the lingering doubt I hadn't admitted aloud. I had grown used to believing that endurance was proof of strength, but maybe letting go was its own kind of courage. On Thursday evening, I walked into my first photography class, camera in hand. The room buzzed with quiet energy students introducing themselves, tripods being adjusted, lenses clicking into place. I slid into a seat near the back, feeling nerves give way to anticipation as the instructor spoke about light and shadow, about seeing the world differently. By the end of class, I had already exchanged numbers with 2 classmates, both eager to practice together on weekends. I walked home through the city streets, camera slung over my shoulder, a sense of possibility thrumming under my skin. When I opened the door to my loft, the boxes waiting to be unpacked no longer felt like a burden, but a beginning. When my parents invited me for dinner again, I braced myself for the usual tension, but the moment I stepped into their dining room, I sensed something different. The table was set simply no china, no champagne, just a roast chicken and a basket of rolls. The air felt lighter, less staged. Dorian was already seated, fiddling with a fork, and when he looked up, there was something unfamiliar in his expression. "I started training this week," he said after a pause. "Entry-level stuff, mostly paperwork and errands. But it's a start." My mother's face brightened. "That sounds promising. What kind of projects do they have you working on?" He shrugged. "Almost shy. Social media campaigns. I'm learning as I go." For once, my father didn't dismiss his answer or turn the spotlight away. Instead, he nodded. "Every job teaches you something. Stick with it." I sipped my water, listening as the conversation moved back and forth without the usual undercurrent of blame. My parents asked me about my photography class, and for the first time in years, their curiosity felt genuine rather than perfunctory. Dorian kept glancing my way, as though expecting me to cut him down, but I didn't. I only nodded when he described his tasks, offering encouragement without taking ownership of his progress. The balance held, delicate but present, like the fragile stem of a wine glass that might break if handled carelessly. As dessert was served, laughter rippled around the table, soft and cautious, but real enough to remind me that something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't resolution, not yet, but it was a beginning. Later that night, as I drove home, the memory of that simple meal stayed with me, carrying me into what came next. The loft was alive with warmth the night I opened my doors to friends who had become something closer to family. Victor brought a stack of board games, Margot carried a bottle of wine, and Dorothy arrived with her usual wit, filling the space with laughter that echoed off the bare walls. We crowded around the coffee table, plates balanced on our laps, stories flowing as easily as the drinks. For once, I felt surrounded not by obligation, but by choice. Later, when the others had gone and the loft quieted again, Dorian lingered by the window. His voice was low, hesitant. "Can you help me with a budget? I don't want to screw this job up." I nodded, surprised by the vulnerability in his tone. We spread his pay stubs and expenses across the table, and for the first time, I saw him leaning into responsibility rather than running from it. A few days later, my parents stopped by. The conversation was halting, awkward, but different. My mother admitted, softly, that they hadn't realized how much they had asked of me over the years. My father said little, but the silence was no longer dismissive. It was reflective, uncertain. They didn't have answers, but they were willing to try. As I packed away the papers from Dorian's budgeting session, I felt the truth settle quietly inside me. Boundaries hadn't broken us. They had forced us to grow into something new, fragile but real, like the beginning of a different story.